What's up, guys? It's your boy Whit from Knockout Analysis, and today we will be doing a full card breakdown of UFC 320 Pereira Ankalaev, and I'll be starting from the early prelims, going all the way up to the main event. Without further ado, let's get it started. Veronica Hardy, Brogan Walker. I think Terrence McKinney said on Twitter, it's guaranteed that Jesus loves you, and Veronica Hardy is the first fight in the early prelims. And that is the case for UFC 320, as she is a very heavy favorite, and I think the line is quite warranted. Usually around that line, it would indicate a finish, but I don't think she's going to get it over Brogan Walker. She has not been a fight finisher. Veronica Hardy hasn't. She has one finish, and that was like 6 years ago, many, many moons. Also against a fighter that I don't think is very good either. Brogan Walker, she was the runner-up in the season of, I think it was the Ultimate Fighter. She got finished in that championship fight against Juliana Miller, and her last fight was against Yasmin Lucindo in 2023 of April. I don't think she's all that good, but I don't think Veronica Hardy has a lot of finishing potential. I think this fight's going to go the full 15 minutes. I think it's going to be pretty dominant, though. I'm going to say 30-26, a lot of ground control time in this one for Veronica. If you're looking to skip out on the first 15 minutes of this, you're just looking to do something else, I think the first fight might be a little bit of a snooze fest, but this next one, Austin Vanderford, Ramiz Brahimaj, I think it has some fireworks to it at least. These are both grapple heavy fighters, but I think there will be a pace to it. Austin Vanderford made a great impression his debut against Veretennikov, finishing him up in the second round, I believe. Absolutely dominating performance, broke him in that fight. And Ramiz Brahimaj, what can I say about him? He's been an underdog, and this is his third straight fight being an underdog. He's a massive underdog against Billy Ray Goff. Came out there and submitted him pretty quickly. Was a surprising underdog against Mickey Gall. Came out there, finished him pretty quickly, but Mickey Gall has the head movement of a heavy bag, and Billy Ray Goff, well, he was pretty unproven coming into that anyways. Austin Vanderford has had success in the Bellator PFL leagues, and he has been a title challenger at that level as well. I think that he's going to have an advantage everywhere in this fight. People are talking about Brahimaj's power because he knocked out Mickey Gall, but that's his only knockout victory in 17 fights. I just don't think it's going to happen to Vanderford, despite the fact that he has been chinned twice in his career. I think Vanderford's going to be able to take him down. I think he's going to show levels in the grappling, and I expect about a second round TKO finish in this one. Next, we'll be moving on to Farid Basharat and Chris Gutierrez. Chris Gutierrez has really good leg kicks, and he is a seasoned veteran. At one point was a headline fighter against Song Yadong, I believe. Yep, Song Yadong, a fight in which he lost. That was about 2 years back at this point. But most recently, he has been just scraping by with close decision victories against Quang Bang Lee and John Castaneda. Not the most impressive of names. I think Basharat, I think he's younger. I think he's more athletic. I think he has more tools in his game. I think he's a much better grappler. Chris Gutierrez has shown weakness to the takedown in his past, and I think that's a recipe for disaster against Basharat. It is a minus 600 favorite for Basharat. If you came in earlier in the week, Basharat was like around a minus 370, which I think there was value on that line, but a minus 600 usually implicates a finish. I don't think there's going to be one in this one. Basharat does not have a lot of finishing potential, especially against somebody that I think is a little bit higher level in the bantamweight division. I expect a pretty cut and dry 30-27, though. There could be a pace to this one. Basharat does fight pretty fast, but Gutierrez, he's not a very finishable guy. He's only been finished once in his 30 fights, and that was 6-7 years ago. So give me Basharat 30-27 as we go on to the next one here. Messi Chasson and Yana Santos. Yana Santos, Crown and I spoke on earlier this year. We both picked her to lose to Miesha Tate. And that fight was just from top to bottom. I think Misha Tate's time has come. You know, I think she needs to take one more fight, get a win against a jobber, and ride off into the sunset. She's a legend in women's mixed martial arts, but I think her time has come. And I think Yana Santos is kind of out in the same area. I think Macy Chasson is a legitimate contender. She's a minus 220 next to her name right now as far as the odds. Recently has lost to Caitlin Vieira, who is also a legitimate bantamweight contender, top five fighter in the division currently. I think Macy Chasson's gonna come in here. I think she's gonna get a finish, man. I think she can get. It's gonna go either way as far as that, but I think she's gonna get a takedown. I think she's gonna get a sub here in about the. I think the second or third round. I think the fatigue is gonna get to Santos. I think she's had a lot of fights. I think her prime years are far behind her, and I think Macy Chasson has a little bit left to give to the game. As we move on to Punel Soriano, Nikolay Veretennikov. Now, Soriano, he really impressed me in his last fight. I'll say that. Finishing Uros Medic in 30 seconds. Who does that to Uros Medic? I say that as he literally walked into the same punch in his last fight. But it didn't finish him up, because whoever Medic was fighting, what was it? Gilbert Urbina does not have as much power as Soriano. Soriano has that Islander power. He has some strength to him, and he's went out here. He's been steadily improving. The Miguel Baeza fight was very impressive. He dominated in the grappling and in many other areas there, and he has struggled against lower levels of competition like a Dustin Stoltzfus and a Nick Maximov, but I will say that was a few years ago, and he has grown as a fighter, and he's also went down a weight class since taking those losses. He's a former middleweight fighter, now in welterweight, fighting Nikolay Veretennikov, who proved at UFC 318 that he has some of the worst fight IQ in the Ultimate Fighting Championship currently. I think this could be his last fight if he loses. He might be very well on a 4-fight contract here. And after that Vanderford fight that he lost, he did throw a punch after the fight was called, try to get in a fight with Vanderford, and Vanderford just flipped him off. I would have done the same if I were him, honestly. I would have just been like, dude, I just kicked your ass. Why are you trying to fight me again? But I think Veretennikov is going to get finished here. It's not like he's trash on the feet. He's very nice on the feet. It's not like he can't grapple, but he just doesn't know what to do when he's down there, despite him having athletic and explosive transitions. So I'm going to take Soriano here. I think he's going to be a lot more composed. I don't think he's going to put himself in harm's way against Veretennikov. The only time he's ever been knocked out was against Roman Kopylov, who is a very, very nice fighter as far as kickboxing goes at 185. I don't think Veretennikov has the power to get him out of there. I think Soriano, I think he's going to get a second round KO in this one. I think Veretennikov is going to put himself in a tough position, and I think this could very well be his last fight. As far as the line goes, minus 320. Earlier in the week, it was minus 220, so the public has been steaming the line. They've been seeing kind of what I've been seeing as far as this fight goes. I expect it to grow as we get later into the day, as we get closer to these fights. So if you like to throw it in a parlay, if you're into that kind of thing, I would say more power to you. Go to it. I think Soriano is going to get the win here. On to the next one. We got Edmund Shabazian, Andre Muniz. Andre Muniz is 35. He's lost 3 out of his last 4. Somehow pulled one off against Jungyeon Park 2 years ago. And really, he hasn't been that active. He had 3 fights in 2023, didn't fight in 2024. And this is now his second fight in 2025. And this is like shortly after he got brutally knocked out by Ikram Aliskerov. And usually getting brutally knocked out and coming back into the cage 5-6 months later is not the greatest idea in the world, especially against a guy like Edmund Shabazian, who I think is pretty dangerous, and explosive. Edmund Shabazian, I think he got pushed a little quick. He's 27 years old, and they put him against some of the best guys in the world very quick. Derek Brunson, Jack Hermanson, Nasruddin Imavov, Fluffy Hernandez. These are all very high level names, especially for the time period with Derek Brunson. I just think he's improved since those losses. He's went out here and he's beaten some lower level guys. He's beaten a Dylan Budka. He's beaten a Andre Petrosky, AJ Dobson victory. He did have the banana peel moment and got subbed by Gerald Mearshart, as Gerald has done to so many different guys in the middleweight division. But I don't think Muniz is going to be able to pull that type of maneuver off. I think Edmund Shabazian is very well aware of Muniz's abilities. I think he's very well aware that he has a massive advantage on the feet, and I think he's gonna go out there. I think he's gonna finish him up pretty early. If I'm being honest, I think this line should be a lot wider than it is. I think Shabazian should be about where Alaskarov was. If I remember correctly, Alaskarov was like a -5 or 600. I think Shabazian should be in this same boat here. I think Muniz, I think his chin's cooked. I think he only really has one path to victory, and it's going to be against some guys that are not as good as Edmund Shabazian is at this point. Give me a first round KO by Shabazian. Give me a head kick. I'm going to get a little fancy with this one, a head kick KO in the first round. And that's all I got on that one as we move on to Patchy Mix. Now, I had to eat my words on Patchy Mix the last go around. I was saying he was going to be a world champion and he was going to dominate Mario Batista, but that was far from what occurred in the fight, much to my chagrin. I don't really love Mario Batista, but let's just say the UFC's doing him a huge favor here. They're doing him a huge favor. He's fighting the former KSW champion, Jacob Wikolacz, I think is the name. It's Polish, so forgive me on the pronunciation. I've watched this guy fight with the volume down. I haven't really listened to his pronunciation. I probably should have done that, but let bygones be bygones. I think Patchy Mix is a state of the art, world class grappler. I don't understand why he didn't do it against Mario Batista, but I think he's going to be able to do whatever he wants in the grappling against Jacob. I think that also Jacob doesn't have any area on the feet where he's going to be threatening either. I think Patchy's going to have the advantage there as well, albeit it'll be pretty slight considering his last performance. And Patchy Mix just didn't have the typical swag or the oomph that he normally has coming in. I think he's not going to have the stage fright that he did last time around. And if this fight happened 8 months ago, he'd be like a -800, -900. He's a -350 right now. I think he's going to go out there and I think he's going to sub him in the first or second round. I think this is going to be a dominating performance from Patchy Mix. He's going to get on the mic and he's going to call somebody out in the rankings. And that's what I see from that one. If you want to look at a sub prop, if you want to throw Patchy Mix in a parlay, let it fly, man. Next, we got Daniel Santos and Ju Sang Yu. Ju Sang Yu has gotten a lot of hype. He's been called the Korean McGregor because he knocked out Jeka Sergey. And me, I kind of want to pump the brakes on that. Jeka Sergey is a Weston Wilson and Anshul Jubilee victim. And Ju Sang Yu, as impressive as the knockout was, I think he was top 3 on SportsCenter that night. He hasn't fought really anybody so far. That's his only UFC victory. He's 1-0, and the rest has been against nobodies. And Daniel Willie Cat Santos, he moved up to featherweight in his last fight against another Korean fighter, in which he was a decently sized underdog. He's a +160, and he went out there and he dominated Young Lee. He's went out there and he's had good performances in bantamweight as well. He's 3-1. He had the banana peel moment against Julia Ars. I think that fight happened again, that he would be more than avenge that one. Daniel Santos, I'm going to take him. He has more experience, and I don't think he's going to run into a massive punch from Ju Sang Yu. And I'm going to take him here to, I think he's going to get a finish in the third. I think Ju Sang Yu is going to gas in this one. I don't really expect them to. live up to his last performance. I think he's going to feel some pressure to get a finish. I think the minus 150 line's warranted. A lot of people have been liking Ju Sang Yu. They have been absolutely all over Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere saying that Santos shouldn't be the favorite. But I think based off of their UFC records and their experience, I think they should. And I think this has very well has fight of the night potential written all over it. As we get into our next one, which is honestly, there's not really much for me to say about this, dude. Like, it's a Tebe Gautier and Tristan Vines. Yeah, Tristan Vines. This guy signed for this fight 3 days ago, and just go on Twitter or Instagram and look at the face off between these guys. It's like when I was 5 years old and I was trying to fight my 15-year-old brother. Like, it's absolutely absurd. The line is minus 4,000 Gautier. I think that's a UFC record. I think it could be very well wider. I expect Gautier to win this fight in under a minute, and I'm not really going to spend much more time on it as we go in finally to the main card. Now, this is going to be a hot take. This is going to be my first underdog of the night, first real underdog of the night at least. Abus Magomedov, Joe Pyfer. Abus Magomedov, I think, has improved immensely. Since he first got into the Ultimate Fighting Championship, he came in off of PFL runner-up in the tournament. I think it was in the first year that they did it, and he got finished by Sean Strickland, and then he lost to Kai Barrio, who are respectively two of the best fighters in middleweight currently. And he's been going out there these last three fights. Submitted Bruno Ferreira, which is impressive considering what Bruno Ferreira's done in the UFC. And he's finished, or not finished, but he might as well have finished Marcel Pereira. The way he dominated that fight. He's been out here. He's been a lot more patient, and his cardio has gotten a lot better. He's not going and throwing everything into the first round and getting finished or getting dominated the last two rounds. Whereas Joe Pyfer is pretty much, in my mind, what Abus used to be. He has a nice straight punch up the middle that is incredibly strong. That dude loads it up and throws it over and over again. He did that against Kelvin Gastelum, and he gassed after the first round against Gastelum. I think he won the second round. He did enough to win that, but the third round, I think, was Gastelum's. That fight was closer than it should have been. I thought Joe Pyfer was a much better fighter than what was represented. That's really kind of been the story of his career. Like, he's very talented, but he throws a lot into the first round, and he just really, I don't know, it just ruins the rest of the fight for him, really. And that a great example of this is the Jack Manson fight. That was his big moment to become ranked and put on a dominating performance, and he gassed out and he lost the last three rounds. I see the same thing happening here. There's no reason for me to believe otherwise. Joe Pyfer's either winning this in the first round, making me eat my words, or he's getting submitted in the third by Abus. I think Abus is going to take his time. I think he's going to find that finish in the third. I like that plus 215, man. I think there's a lot of value on that, and I'm going to rock with him. He's going to be my quick pick here. Next, we probably have the worst fight on the main card. Josh Emmett, Yusuf Zalal. I mean, if you watched the Lerone Murphy Josh Emmett fight, which if you did, God bless you, because that was the worst card of the year. This is going to be the exact same fight. This is going to be the exact same fight, bro. Yusuf Zalal is going to fight on the outside. Josh Emmett's going to be missing a bunch of overhands. Yusuf Zalal is going to piece him up at range. And this is going to be like a pretty clear 30-27 victory for Yusuf Zalal. The crowd's not going to love this one. I don't expect anyone to say this is fight of the night. People may be calling Yusuf Zalal a fraud, after this one, but things can change quickly for him. You see what happened to Lerone Murphy. Everybody thought Lerone Murphy was an unskillful bum after his Josh Emmett fight, and then he went out there and landed a spinning elbow, and everybody loves him now and thinks he should get the title shot, and I think he should, but I think he should get the title shot, but he went from a boring fighter to an absolute firework, in the matter of one fight, which I think is absolutely hilarious. Sometimes how this sport moves. But I'm gonna take Yusuf Zalal 30-27. Not a whole lot to say about it. Minus 525 is pretty steep. I don't think there's really value on that. You know, I think Josh Emmett does have a puncher's chance, but I just don't think he's going to be able to land in this one. I think Yusuf Zalal is going to outvolley him. And I'll say it again, 30-27 as we move on to the next one. Yuri Prohaska, Khalil Roundtree, must see TV. We got, this is an absolute banger, right? Every time Yuri fights, like it's fight of the night potential. Like this and the Jusang Yu Willie Cat Santos fight, I think these are going to be like neck and neck fight of the night. But I think this one may not be it because there's a lot more finishing potential early for both of these guys. Yuri Prohaska, he's a Czech samurai. He just kind of throws caution to the wind, and it works out for him. He fights great under chaos after everybody knows, or as everybody knows. Put on a dominant performance against Jamal Hill, and Khalil Roundtree did the exact same. These guys both put it on Jamal Hill, and this is kind of like the bowl to see who's better. Khalil Roundtree was really patient in his fight, and Yuri is really chaotic in his last fight. So it's like it's a stylistic clash to say the least. I think Yuri's going to come in there though, and I think he's going to do his thing. I think he's going to land a KO. I know it was some time ago that Khalil Roundtree was losing to Marcin Prashniel and Yantu Kutsalaba, and he did go on a great win streak before fighting Alex Pereira. And this is something I kind of said like before the Jamal Hill fight. I think I picked Jamal Hill in that one. Obviously he made me eat my words, but that dude took like 5 fights worth of damage against Alex Pereira. Like he took a bunch of damage, man. And eventually that's gonna catch up to him. Whereas Yuri Prohaska, he didn't take a lot of damage in those fights. He straight up just got finished. Like there's been fights where Yuri's taken a ton of damage, but it hasn't really been recent. I think it's been a few years, and he's looked really good. Outside of those 2 Alex fights, I'm gonna take him to win, but I think this fight could be close. I think both of them have a lot of finishing potential. Minus 190 is a little steep for a fight that I view to be like, I view Yuri as like a minus 140. Minus 190 is pretty steep. I think the plus 170 for Khalil is pretty tempting, considering that both of these guys have a lot of power and they have a lot of great techniques that could very well deliver the knockout blow on either side. So I'm going to pick Yuri to win, but I like Khalil's line here. Next, we got the one, the only Merab Dvalishvili and Corey Sandhagen. I would sit here and say this fight's a foregone conclusion, and honestly, I will. I think Merab's going to dominate this on every level. I don't think he's going to stand up and strike like he said he did. Fighters lie about that all the time. I think he's going to dominate this on the ground. I think he's going to shoot a shit ton of takedowns, and he's going to gas Corey out. I think a finish is not off the table late. I think he get a TKO or maybe even a sub like he did against Sean O'Malley in his last fight, but I think it's going to be a 50-45, maybe even a 50-44. If the judges are feeling generous or if Corey gets dominated to that level. Like, this is kind of like Pantoja fighting Kai Kara France. I'll use that fight as an example. Merab is Pantoja was just a much better fighter than KKF, and KKF had a lot of power. And Merab, he's just a much better fighter than Corey Sandhagen, but Corey Sandhagen, he has flying knees and he's really technical on the feet. But I don't really think that's going to be much of a, I don't think that's going to be a factor for Corey. He got dominated by Umar recently. He won against Davidson Figueiredo in somewhat of a fluky way, if you ask me. And I just don't think he has much of a shot, And I think I'm going to say that in a lot of Merab's fights going forward. Whenever Merab loses, if he ever loses at bantamweight, it's going to be unexpected for everybody. So I'm always open to that, but I'm probably just never going to pick it to happen. Give me Merab here by pretty dominant decision. Minus 425. I think that's a pretty warranted line. Even though I'm not really predicting a finish, I think that's fair. I don't think Corey has a lot of paths to victory in this one other than a crazy spinning or flying KO. So I'll take the Marab line. I like it. I wouldn't bet on it, but because it's minus 425, but it is what it is. We're gonna move on to the final fight of the evening, and this first fight pissed me off, man. The first time this fight happened, and I will say before we get into this, like rematches this year have not done very well, have not gone very well for the guy that lost the first fight. Like we look at DDP and Sean Strickland. DDP dominated the rematch, right? We look at Marab and Sean O'Malley. Marab dominated the rematch. And we look at the Paul Hughes fight. Those fights were very controversial. A lot of people thought Paul Hughes won the first one, myself included, but I thought Usman Nurmagomedov dominated the second one. A lot of people have different scorecards than I do on that one, though. And man, I really thought Alex won the first fight. That's became an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people don't really like Alex. I think a lot of Adesanya fans don't like Alex. I think a lot of Russian people just don't like Brazilian fighters in general. And I think a lot of people were just preying on Alex's downfall because he kind of did get fast tracked to some titles. He was a kickboxer for a really long time, very successful one at that. And became a double champion very quick. And a lot of people just didn't like him. They were kind of tired of seeing him all the time, as he was pretty much what saved the UFC in 2024. He was the biggest name by far, and you saw him everywhere, even when you didn't want to see him. But I don't really understand it, man. I really don't understand how he lost the first fight. First round, he won handedly. Second round, Magomed won handedly. Third round. The third round was very close. And I don't get how it was just like a unanimous across three scorecards that he lost that one, dude. Like, he outstruck Magomed in that round. And there wasn't like an incredibly damaging shot from either guy. So I thought Alex won that round. Fourth round, Magomed cage hugged him for the whole entire round. Didn't do crap the whole entire round, but I guess he won it. In the fifth round, Alex rocks Magomed, and two of the three scorecards had Alex on that fifth round, which I agree with. So I thought it was a clear 3-2 for Alex, man. But he's only going to get older. He's 38. He's taken a lot of damage in his kickboxing career, a lot of damage here in the UFC. I don't particularly find Magomed too impressive, though, even though he is a 21-1 champion. You know, outside of Alex, I mean, really, I tweeted this on my UFC Twitter page the other day. Name one impressive finish against an elite opponent that Magomed has. Name an impressive opponent that he's even just dominated. He doesn't have one. The Rakic fight was close. The Pereira fight was close. He didn't beat Jan Blachowicz either. That fight was a draw, and I thought he lost that one too. Like, I'm not even trying to sound like a hater, but it's just like, I don't get the hype behind this guy. I just really don't. I watch the fights and I just leave unimpressed because he's not finishing or dominating any of these guys. And it's just a weird watch for me every single time. I think Alex is a lot more locked in. I will say I have picked in the rematches, I have picked wrong every single time. So I don't know if that's gonna mean anything because I did pick Sean Strickland. I did pick Sean O'Malley. I want to pick Alex here. I want to pick him to get a knockout here early. I think he's a lot more locked in. I think he's ready for all of it this time around. And I just don't think Magomed is going to be able to implement the same game plan he did the first time around. I think there is some truth to the rumors about him breaking his hand. I think he definitely wasn't locked in the first training camp. He was kind of doing like a world tour type thing, which once you reach the status of an Alex Pereira, you're going to have some sort of world tour, you know? And that's what he did before the Ankalaev fight last time around. And I think that was kind of his undoing, even though he was very well prepared in the wrestling area. So I'm gonna take Alice Pereira. Give me the first round knockout here, and that is gonna conclude the predictions for this. Next week, where are we at? We're in Brazil next week. Kron should be back for that one. We have some interviews up. We had the Tater McSpadden interview up yesterday. We have another interview on the way as well. So stay tuned for that. Enjoy these last minute picks before UFC 320, and I'll see y'all in the next video.